Friday, June 16th, 2017, Monaco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. I'd like to talk today about some of the books that I've read in the past about money, gold, and economics and money, and how it relates to our present monetary system and central banking. I feel that when people talk about central banks and the financial system and the banks, people call them capitalist and free marketeers, but I think it's very far from the truth. Central banks are a monopoly. Even though they're privately controlled and privately owned, in my opinion, they are given legislative powers by the government. They wouldn't have the monopoly to print money and create credit if it wasn't for the government and for the laws. So they're not really a free market, institution. And even though they come out and pretend that they're for the free market, they're anything but free market. They're like OPEC, the oil cartel. I would actually say that the equivalent for the central banks is the Bank for International Settlements. That bank controls the major central banks. They meet regularly in Basel, Switzerland. The heads of the Fed, ECB, Bank of England, Bank of Japan, Bank of Canada. They all meet regularly and in secret. They don't have to report anything. They're above the law. They have diplomatic immunity. It just doesn't sound like a free market enterprise. It just feels like gangsters, like working together and keeping the public in the dark. So yeah, when this paradigm of left and right, I think all it does to the general public is keep us down, this division, because the real problem is the monetary system and how it controls the economy. For example, if you lived on the street and you went around and you had a printing press in your basement, you went around and printed all the money and bought everything where you live, you'd be in control of everyone. And that's what the central banks do through their agent banks, the big investment banks, the commercial banks. So yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about this morning. The markets, by the way, it's 8:30 a.m. London. They're very quiet, so there's not really much to report. So I'll go into these books now. One of the books that I read a long time ago, I started looking into free markets probably back in the late 90s, early 2000s. I read the book first, the Atlas Shrugged and by Ayn Rand. That was a really interesting book. And then I started looking into gold. For some reason, I don't really remember why, back in 2002. And then I started, bought some Krugerrands at 222 pounds an ounce at the time. And then I started following the gold market, reading about gold. The internet, was still fairly, young thing. But there was loads of more information than there was to read about 10 years before. We didn't have the internet, 10 years before, like in 1990. So I was able to, read a lot about gold. And this is one of the books that I read. And I've read it several times. And it's not a very long book. It's only about 70 pages. Fiat Money, Inflation in France. And it says how it came, what it brought, and how it ended. And it's written by Andrew Dickson White. And funnily enough, Andrew Dickson White was Skull and Bones at Yale University in the 19th century. And he was the president of Cornell University. And I think he wrote this book. It was in the, I think it was written like in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And it basically went through the period when they had the French Revolution in 1789 up until 1795, and how France as a country went totally bust. And it wasn't overnight. It was a process, you know, from Louis XIV, you know, over 100 years before, you know, and all the splurging of the French state. And it collapsed. You know, it didn't have any money. So they decided in France to bring an experiment of printing money out of thin air, which was, at the time, was something really revolutionary. Not surprising, though, French Revolution. And they're called assignats. And actually, they were based on the ecclesiastical land that the French revolutionaries took over, you know, from the Catholic Church. At least they were based on land. But it's really interesting. It talks about how, you know, the people involved in France in politics, economics at the time, they were the cleverest people, the most intelligent, the most successful people, and they thought they could do it, you know, and it all ended in tears. The money became worthless. There was tyranny, you know, they try to control prices because prices were going up because they're printing so much money. Farmers didn't want to sell their produce, you know, for worthless paper, and you know, you'd be sentenced to death if you were caught dealing with anything else but assignats, you know, gold or silver. But then you know, this all ended. You know, they burnt the printing press, destroyed it in Paris at the Place de la Vendôme, you know, and then Napoleon took over. He brought, actually put France back on a gold standard, started minting coins. But very interesting. And Andrew Dickson White wrote this, and he says, you know, that this would never happen in the U.S. And he thought, but the reason this book was published as well was, I think, in 1933 when Roosevelt, you know, took the U.S. off the domestic gold standard. There's a group of bankers who basically republished this paper by Andrew Dickson White and gave it to their associates. So if you look here, it says, and I'll read now, Bank of New York and Trust Company, December 7th, 1933. So that was after, you know, the Gold Confiscation Act and everything, Roosevelt. It says, "Dear sir, in 1790, the French people, by general acquiescence, embarked upon what they believed to be a harmless experiment in currency inflation. The results of this action are vividly described in Dr. Andrew White's book entitled Fiat Money Inflation in France, How It Came, What It Brought, and How It Ended. Will you do me the favor of reading the copy of this book sent to you herewith? If it impresses you, I shall appreciate your circulating among your friends. If you have occasion to use additional copies, we shall be glad to furnish them as long as our limited supply lasts. Very, very truly yours, President." So back in 1933, you had the president of the Bank of New York and Trust Company writing to his associates and, you know, pleading with them to read this book, to see, so they could see what, you know, FDR was putting the country into. I know the dollar's still around. It's taken a lot longer. You know, we're almost 100 years from 1933, you know, 85 years almost. And the dollar's still around. So the thing is, yeah, this was an incident that only happened in one country. It was in France. But the case of the dollar and the fiat money system has been happening in all the Western countries. So they've been able to keep the game going longer. But in my opinion, it will end like France in 1795 or thereabouts. So that was one of the books that really got me to believe that the system was not as solid as I thought it was back in the 90s. I started working in banking and finance in the late 80s. I'd never thought about these things. There weren't any bank failures, huge bank failures or anything in the 90s or early 2000s. But once I started looking into this in the early 2000s, I thought, our system, there's something wrong. And I started talking to my colleagues at work in the city, and most of them, thought I was crazy. Some of them listened to me, and then we had 08, so they've patched it up for now. But I think the system is still, in critical condition. If it wasn't, why would this problem in Spain be happening with their smaller banks? They're going bust. Why are the Italian banks still not out of the, out of the hole yet? So, and the other book that I really like is this one, What Has Government Done to Our Money? And the Case for a 100% Gold Dollar. It's by Murray Rothbard, and it's a Mises Institute book, Austrian School of Economics. I think it's very good book. So in order to understand what money really is, the nature of money, that money is just like a utility. It facilitates indirect exchange, and it's paramount in a advanced industrial free market society. Because if you have to barter, there's no specialization. If you have to barter, you go into living in subsistence farms, and it's very difficult. We wouldn't have, and and you might say, well, we've done really well with the fiat money in the last 100 years, so why are you talking about this? Well, I think it could be, things could have been a lot better. Who's to say that things wouldn't be better? That we still have a lot of inequality, a lot of inflation, a lot of poverty and unemployment, so it could have been better if we had stayed on the gold standard. And the other book that I really like, I bought this in the early 2000s as well, is Gold Wars. And it says The Battle Against Sound Money as Seen from a Swiss Perspective by Ferdinand Lips, a Swiss banker. He died in 2005, so quite a few years ago. And I'll read a little bit about him, and it's really interesting. To all those who say that there's no manipulation, this guy was an insider, and I'll read about him so you can see. It says, about Ferdinand Lips. Born in Switzerland in 1931, Ferdinand Lips is a well-established and respected authority on gold and the gold market. His roots are in banking, where he started his career and became a co-founder and managing director of Rothschild Bank AG in Zurich. In 1987, he opened his own bank, Bank Lips AG, also in Zurich. He retired in 1998 and sold his equity interest in the bank. So you can see he's a former Rothschild banker, so he knows he knew what was going on. He says, in his free time, Ferdinand Lips likes to spend time with his tutors, study history, architecture, philosophy. So, and I'll read some of the, comments by people about the book. So you have an idea what it's about. It says, it's the great merit of his provocative book by Ferdinand Lips to bring back a wider understanding on why gold was a solid base for economic stability in many societies. Professor Dr. Abt, Federal Institute of Technology, Zurich, Switzerland. Gold and freedom are inseparable. This is the thesis of Gold Wars, a manuscript that I recommend every modern-day business person should read. Dr. Mark Bristol, PhD, Chief Executive Officer, Rand Gold Resources. Mr. Lips, makes the history of gold come alive and will enthuse you to join the war for the sake of freedom, free markets, and social peace. You will want 50 copies for your best friends, press, and politicians. Harry Schultz, International Harry Schultz Ladder. Gold Wars is a must for anyone with an interest in the future of the global monetary system. Mark Wellesley Wood, Chairman Durban Rudaport Deep. So I recommend, yeah, all these 3 books. Gold Wars, What Has Government Done to Our Money? And the one that I really like is this one, Fiat Money, Inflation in France. You can find a copy of this for free online, PDF. The other 2, I'm not sure. You have to look online. I'll put the links below to the books. So yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about. We don't have free markets. We don't have sound money. If anything, we have a oligarchical system run by the central banks. A group of people who can actually create money, supposed money, out of thin air and control the whole of society and steal assets from people. They get people, and the way they do that is to entice people to borrow, to buy things, and then they pull the plug, and then they buy these buy property, for cents on the dollar. And that's why the world is getting more and more unequal. That's why we have less than maybe 1% of the world controlling almost everything, like 0.01%. It's becoming more like third world countries like Brazil or India. And the reason Brazil or India, have been the way they are is that they left the sound money principle a lot earlier than the West. So if you enjoyed this video, give me a thumbs up, share it far and wide. If you like to get updates from my channel, subscribe to it. Watch my videos also on steemit.com, STEEMIT.com. If you like to make a donation to the channel as well, there's some links below in the description. I'll talk to you later. Bye.